Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about observability, very hot topic here in 2022. Observability, of course, is the ability to monitor the elements of a tech stack, which is more important as our tech stacks get ever more complicated. To discuss that, I'm joined by Peter Pezaris, Senior Vice President, Strategy and User Experience at New Relic. Peter, good to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks very much for having me. Excited to be here.
So you've done this survey, and it's a very cool survey. I want to get to some of the findings, but first, please give me some background about the survey. What are the details there that made you do it?
Sure. Well, we started last year, and we started our 2021 observability forecast report. And what we tried to focus there is that how digital transformation and full stack observability is changing the way that businesses deploy software.
Mm-hmm.
And in this year's survey, we wanted to go bigger. So we wanted to expand the number of customers that we talked about. And we wanted to focus on the next chapter in the story, like what's driving best practices, and importantly, what's the impact of those practices and how they can help businesses today.
Interesting. Okay. And I'm sure, obviously, if we're going to talk about some individual findings from the report, but if you sort of give us the big picture, 500 feet above the earth view of the report, is there a major takeaway or so that you would take away from the survey?
Yeah, there is, and the way that when we got the results from the survey, of course, there's tons and tons of data, and so you comb through it and try to find out what is the big takeaway and what's the most important thing that this data is telling us.
Right.
What that is that observability drives increased revenue retention and innovation. So what does that mean? It means like you make more money, like you
Yes.
prevent outages, you stop that revenue leakage from your systems not being available. And then we also observability enables faster and better innovation. And what's really interesting about that is that, as part of this survey, we found that 78% of the survey respondents indicated that observability was a key enabler of achieving their core business goals. And that enjoyed C-suite level support, with 73% of C-suite executives are advocates of observability.
You mentioned innovation here, and I want to make sure, if you could elaborate a little bit on the innovation piece. How does that work?
Sure. One of the challenges that some immature observability practices deal with is siloed data. So if you have some of your data in one service provider and some data in others and some data in others, well, what that leads to is siloed information. And so different groups within your organization go to different tools to gain whatever insights they can. But that creates siloed workflows, siloed information exchange, et cetera. And so in order to deliver software, of course, it takes a village. And so different parts of your organization need to work together in order to build the best software stack. So with a platform approach where instead of having data silos, you have all your data in one tool, in one consolidated view, part of our mature observability practice, then teams across your organization can not only see the data that directly impacts their work, but they can see how that data and how their services and how their workflows impact other teams within the organization. And what that leads to is a more collaborative environment where your different areas of your team are working better together to drive faster innovation.
Makes perfect sense. All right, well, let's drill down a bit into some of the survey's findings. Finding number one: only 27% of organizations have achieved full stack observability, the ability to see everything in the tech stack that could affect the customer experience. Just 5% had a mature observability practice by the report's definition. So this tells me that observability, for all the headlines it gets, and it does get quite a few, it's still a little bit ahead of the curve.
Well, I think, observability is widely adopted. A lot of enterprise customers are using some form of observability. And what this survey found was that only 27% have achieved full stack observability. That means you're monitoring the front end, you're monitoring the back end, you have logs. And it's important to be able to tie all those data sources together in order to see a full view of your estate. Now, we further define something called a mature observability practice, and only 5% of enterprise customers are there.
Wow.
That includes things like ability to query data on the fly. So instead of sampling, you're collecting all of the data from your infrastructure. Things are automated, like your instrumentation is automated, and portions of your incident response are automated. So there are all these criteria that we define for the report to get a sense for how mature people are in their observability practice. And one of the really interesting findings was that of those customers that have a mature observability practice, a full 100% of them say that it improves their revenue retention by
Hmm.
by deepening their understanding of how their production infrastructure is working and reducing the outages that they do have.
Interesting. Okay. So a little bit of background. You mentioned that observability is widely adopted. Would you give a rough like year range, and when you think that widespread adoption happened? Like what time frame are we talking about?
But another interesting finding from the survey is that by 2025, over 90% of the surveyed respondents indicate that they are going to have full stack observability. And
Uh-huh.
the number of committed investments, of course, these are forward-looking survey questions, right? They're asking what is going to happen in your organization in the next 3 to 5 years.
Right.
But I was surprised. One of the key takeaways is just how committed organizations are to improving their observability practice.
Mhm. All right, here's another point from the report. About 3 in 10 of respondents said observability enables cross-team collaboration and improves their skill set hireability. What do you take away from that?
Well, we've seen the transformation where, teams work in silos and different parts of your engineering organization are focused on just that one thing. And as we've seen the shift to DevOps and now DevSecOps, we've seen the importance of different areas of your engineering team to work together.
Mhm.
And so, from an observability perspective, it makes it all the more important to be able to have that singular view of all the data sources across your production estate so that different areas of your organization, when they're collaborating from a common set of facts.
Mhm.
So, it's interesting that that 3 in 10 say observability enables cross-team collaboration. But what I'm even more interested in is the forward-looking statements, as I was referring to before. Once these businesses do achieve full stack observability, it'll be interesting to see how that 3 turns into a 4, turns into a 9, and soon 10 out of 10
Mhm. Mhm.
will have cross-team collaboration enabled for their organizations.
All right, next point. The data supports a strong correlation between achieving or prioritizing full stack observability and experiencing fewer outages, improve outage detection rates, and improved mean time to resolution. In other words, in essence, observability is actually working.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about an example about like why is it so important to have full stack observability? And
Mhm.
if you're familiar with these, I'm going to throw out a term from being a pilot where you have
Mhm.
VFR versus IFR. And VFR is when you have visual flight rules. So you
Mhm.
can see essentially there's no cloud cover, it's daytime, and you can see the planes around you and the surroundings. And for a pilot to achieve VFR is relatively, it takes some training, of course, but it's a lot easier than IFR, which is instrument flight
Right,
rating,
right.
flight rules, where you have to rely solely on your instruments in order to fly that plane.
Mhm.
And so just having it really underscores the importance of visibility. When you're trying to diagnose a problem, that is the number one concern. Can I figure out what's happening? Like,
Mhm.
are my instruments giving me enough information? And that's why it's so essential to have an observability practice that takes all of your data sources and that presents them in a consistent way that's broadly available to all of the engineers on your team. So those who are experts in the different aspects of your production infrastructure can troubleshoot faster and get to the resolution of the problem more quickly.
Mhm. This one might worry some folks, but they won't be surprised. More than half, 50%, 52% of organizations experience a high business impact outages once a week or more, and 29% took more than an hour to resolve those outages. So the stack is challenged.
It's pretty scary, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Once a week or more.
Wow.
That's
Okay. Yeah.
that's pretty scary. And one of the things that may not surprise viewers of this interview, but
Mm-hmm.
was one of the core findings of the report, is that those customers who had achieved a mature observability practice had fewer outages.
Right.
And so that means that it's working. And in fact, what we found was that most organizations were planning to increase their investment in observability because of that positive ROI.
Hmm. All right, last point from the survey. Respondents predict their organizations will need observability for AI, IoT, and business applications in the next 3 years. Makes perfect sense, of course, with AI in particular. There's a lot going on there. Observability would be greatly needed.
Yeah, and I think this is part of a trend that we saw in the research findings, that for new technologies especially, observability is key. Because if you've been running a particular technology stack for many, many years, you get a feel for it and you understand how to operate and how to keep it up and running, and the different things that can go wrong.
Hmm.
But when you're deploying new technologies especially, then being able to understand deeply how that's impacting customer experiences becomes all the more important, and observability can really help.
Hmm. I'd like to get your sense of where we're going in the future, but let's take a moment and give you a chance to talk about New Relic a moment. If people are searching for a solution, give us a nutshell on what New Relic does. I think we know that, but please lay it out for us. And why do people select New Relic?
Well, one of the things that we offer to customers is a real platform approach. So rather than having different segments of your data being monitored by different solutions, and in fact, over half of the survey respondents were using 4 different vendors or more, New Relic offers a platform where you can have your entire observability solution with one vendor.
Hmm.
And this has a lot of benefits. This platform approach has a lot of benefits, including like pricing becomes simpler, being able to deploy across your organization, give all of your engineers a view into the same data,
Hmm.
and be able to more quickly act on a view of your entire estate.
Hmm.
So that's one benefit. And I'd say that the other thing that we're doing a little bit differently is focusing on the entire life cycle of the software development.
Hmm.
And so we're actively trying to involve observability at every stage of the software development lifecycle, whether you're planning the next release, whether you're actually writing software and building software, or you're deploying it. And of course, as you operate your infrastructure, New Relic participates in all of those phases.
Interesting. All right. So let's look to the future, the future of observability. We've touched on it a little bit. What do you see a few years, say 3 to 5 years out? What is observability in the enterprise going to look like in your view?
Well, I think, as business get more mature about how they operate their production infrastructure, I think it's very clear that observability is here to stay, and that it's critical to the way that people deploy software. In our last year's survey, it became very clear how critical it was to individual roles. And this year's survey expands upon that and talks about how it can not only save you money, but help you drive innovation.
Hmm.
So the takeaway for me is that if your organization hasn't yet embraced observability, you're a little bit behind the 8 ball, and you're at a disadvantage versus your competitors. So not only can observability make your individual engineer's job easier, it can make your teams more efficient, get them working together, and make your company more competitive. And then, of course, everybody enjoys when we can reduce the number of outages and the duration of those outages.
Hmm.
So another finding from this report is just how fundamental observability will be to tomorrow's technology, whether that's blockchain or Web3. And a lot of today's 5G and a lot of today's emerging technologies will become critical to be able to understand how they're working.
Mhm.
So we're going to see monitoring and observability incorporated to every aspect of that software development, not only when something goes wrong, but as part of the planning process. When we collect data for how things are going, that can inform a lot of what we do as software engineers.
It does seem like a very necessary part of the enterprise IT deployment. You can't fly from Chicago to to Portland without your control, without your view of what's going on. It's hard to run a tech stack without really knowing what's going on.
That's right.
Peter, I think you said it. Interesting, fascinating stuff, and it's going to be a big sector in the years to come, even bigger than it is now. Hope you come back and talk with us sometime. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and super excited about the future of what we're bringing to the market.